Hi, I'm Ann Rieselbach, the League's Program Director. Welcome to the opening night of lectures by this year's Architectural League Prize winners. On behalf of the League, I'd like to thank the League Prize Committee, Luis Beltran de Rio Garcia, Tay Carpenter, and Gabriel Cuellar, all recent League Prize winners, for conceiving and explicating this year's competition theme, grounding, and for their selection of additional jury members, Chris T. Cornelius, Carlo Gisaba, Lola Shepard, and Mabel O. Wilson, who along with the committee devoted considerable time to evaluating all of the entries and then participated in a substantive online session to select 6 winners. Tonight brings the first pair of lectures by 2 of the 6 winners. We hope that you can join us again next Wednesday and on June 29th to hear from the other winning firms. We also hope that you will visit a dynamic online installation of their work, which just launched yesterday on the League's website. Part of what will be a set of material about each winner, including firm profiles, as well as Instagram takeovers, interviews, and lecture videos. All of the online material was created with the essential and very important support of League staff members Rafi Lehman, Elisa Botera, Sarah Wessler, and Ann Carlisle. Britt Cobb and Michael Beirut of Pentagram once again designed compelling competition graphics and the just released and downloadable installation poster, another way of getting the word out about the online and partially local on-site installations. A network of past League Prize winners from across North America is helping to literally put the word and images out on walls and online. All of this is made possible through the enthusiastic corporate support provided by Tischler & Son, Delta Millworks, and Judlow. League programs are also made possible in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council and the New York State Council on the Arts with the support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature. Support is also provided by the Next Generation Fund, an alumni fund of the Architectural League's Emerging Voices in Architectural League Prize programs, and the J. Clausen Mills Fund of the Architectural League. And of course, through the commitment and support of the League's members and friends. We hope that you will join us in the coming weeks for this series and other League programs. Please check the League's website and sign on for our weekly newsletter to learn more about the League, including an extensive collection of online resources such as videos and essays documenting past programs and special projects. League Prize Committee member Gabriel Cuellar, who is a co-founder of Cataster and a professor in practice at the University of Minnesota, will now introduce tonight's speakers, and then after their presentations, he will join them in conversation and forward questions from the audience, which you can please pose in the Q&A section. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Anne, for the introduction. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this first evening of lectures by the 2022 League Prize winners. Tonight, we have the pleasure to hear presentations by Citygroup, an architectural collective based in New York City, and Departamento del Distrito, a design studio directed by Francisco Quiñones and Nathan Friedman in Mexico City. I'm Gabriel Cuellar, and as one of the members of this year's Young Architects and Designers Committee, it's my pleasure to introduce these 2 practices and moderate tonight's session. It has been a great privilege to be involved in the development of the theme together with my colleagues Tay Carpenter and Luis Beltran, the opportunity to spend time reading, discussing, and admiring the submitted portfolios together with the invited jurors, Chris Cornelius, Carla Joasaba, Lola Shepard, and Mabel Wilson, was likewise very rewarding and inspiring. As we prepared the theme for this year's program, Tay, Luis, and I were eager to highlight practices for which grounding is central. With the term grounding, we are referring to the way designers situate their practices within a set of given realities or contingencies. In the call for entries, we hoped the theme could encompass varying interpretations on how architecture interacts with the political, environmental, conceptual, and physical grounds on which it is built. The call sought practices that make vital connections with what is already here, whether that's an existing locality, a stock of material, or a social fabric. In parallel, the prompt sought to highlight how the same practices contend with infrastructures that are placeless and pervasive. Finally, the theme was a way to underscore how all this may also require alternative models of design, conception, action, and study. In other words, ways of grounding architecture in relations beyond the traditional limits of the discipline and practice. The portfolios of the 6 winners all spoke very strongly to this theme and in diverse ways. As the jury deliberated and selected this year's cohort, we greatly admired how Citygroup is working to establish a new form of grounded urban practice, embedding themselves in the struggles of New York City communities. For them, the city seemingly is everything. Similarly, the very name Departamento del Distrito suggests a commitment to a given place, and indeed, their work closely aligns with this. As much as these 2 practices demonstrate the beautiful and impactful effort of place-based groundedness, their work also contributes to broader efforts to articulate the role of architects within global real estate forces, geopolitical orders, professional structures, environmental change, and of course, countervailing community enterprises. I'm delighted to now introduce Citygroup and Departamento del Distrito and share some of the jury's impressions of their submitted work. Citygroup is a collective founded in 2018 in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, New York City. The group's engagements with design and advocacy involve the collaborative effort of a non-hierarchical network of participants. Their work stood out in several inspiring ways. The jury was struck, firstly, by how their practice opens new roles for architects. Their portfolio documented 2 long-term engagements based on community alliances for affordable housing, which have translated into a wide range of grounded actions, design scenarios, and public education events. Connecting architectural tools with land use activism, Citygroup entangles design and the forces that shape it in specific spatial struggles. Secondly, the jury admired how Citygroup not only helps make new outlets for design, but redefines the very terms in which they do so. In its efforts, Citygroup pools the participation of architects, residents, activists, community leaders, government officials, and passersby, among others. The collective makes the case for a new form of participatory practice embedded in public interests in which entirely new relationships come to the fore. Thirdly, we appreciated how Citygroup's work makes visible a range of potential futures. In their projects, the city is not preordained by real estate interests. By contending with zoning and its impacts on the lives of people, they aim at the very foundations of urban transformation and political mobilization in American cities. Their work contributes ultimately to, in their words, spatial strategies to fortify the ground of and for the public. On to the second practice. Francisco Quiñones and Nathan Friedman are the co-founders and directors of the Mexico City-based design practice, Departamento del Distrito. Francisco and Nathan both studied architecture and practiced in internationally recognized offices prior to establishing their own practice in 2017. They have exhibited widely, including in the 2021 Chicago Architecture Biennial, and are also writers and educators, maintaining academic appointments at Rice University and the Universidad Iberoamericana. The jury deeply appreciated Departamento del Distrito's portfolio, which contained 5 highly varied projects. I will highlight some of the jury's commentary. First, the practice finds its grounding through many modes of engagement, including public and private building commissions, zines, and exhibitions. Departamento del Distrito seems to thrive in this variety and connectedness, engaging different types of audiences, commissioners, and collaborators. Next, the projects Francisco and Nathan undertake operate in multiple frames of reference. Their designs result in colorful, bright material configurations on specific sites, and these are always rooted in the backdrop of wider geographic relationships and timescales, which serve as the grounding for the practice's multifaceted portfolio. Finally, the jury appreciated how the practice is committed to hosting conversations on issues characterizing Mexican environments. Their body of work to date constitutes a platform that speaks to preservation, urbanization, popular design, public space, and more. Their League Prize installation, an adapted rooftop communication tower registering the atmospheric, acoustic, and social contingencies of the site, continues the practice's trajectory to, in their words, again, expand upon local sites of interest and link them to matters beyond their immediate bounds. Congratulations, Citygroup. Congratulations, Francisco and Nathan. Thank you for responding so brilliantly to this year's call. We're really excited to hear more about your practices tonight.
Thank you, Gabriel.
Okay, great. We'll get started. So we are Citygroup, and we're here gathered in our space, which is on the border between the Lower East Side and Chinatown in Manhattan in New York City. And the group that's here gathered together around this table are representatives of the larger group that is Citygroup. And tonight we have with us David, AJ, Radhika, Sebastian, Marika, Violet, and I'm Michael. And tonight, the title of our talk is City, Not City, CITY, not CITI.
We want to thank the Architectural League for acknowledging our work, for this generous opportunity and the extensive support they have offered us. We also want to thank Gabrielle Cuellar for a very beautiful introduction, which is truly humbling. We also would like to congratulate the other winners of the prize. While we exist as a group, we are excited to now be a part of this larger group.
So as many of you probably realize, the name of our group, Citygroup, is a play on the name of the corporation, Citygroup. We've simply changed the name of the I to a Y. So the question that we want to ask tonight, that we want to put forth, is what is the difference between I and Y? And anybody who's been to New York City or who lives in New York City is familiar with this word city, C-I-T-I. It's on the facades of buildings. There's a stadium called Citi Field. And it, of course, is the name of the bike share program, Citi Bike, which Citygroup is the corporate sponsor of. But we've really grown accustomed to this word CITI because we see it everywhere across the city. And we rarely stop to think about what this word means. But for us as Citygroup, we think it's important to stop and consider what the CITI represents and what defines it. For us, for Citygroup, the CITI is the extraction of maximum profit from every inch of the city. It is the control of the city by corporate and private interests and the loss of the city for the public in general. It is the real space where people live and work and interact, rendered into saleable and therefore virtual assets. And the CITI manifests in many different ways across New York City. And certainly we feel the threat of the CITI in Chinatown and the Lower East Side, where our space is and where a lot of our work takes place. And this is especially evident from this tower, which looms, this luxury tower, which looms over the neighborhood. So we really feel the force and impact of the CITI. But no matter how the CITI manifests, whether it's large or small, it always represents one thing: the privileging of profit over the people.
Whereas the CITI is singular, the CITY is multiple. For Citygroup, the city with a Y is a model, and we also see the city as a set of real and tangible experiences. It is the ground below us that needs to be protected and modified. We find unique conditions of spatial, political, and social interplay in the city that we aim to advance and to protect. While the CITI often defines the reality of urban experience, As a group, we've explored and advocated for many different definitions of the CITY. We will now present 8 of them. These definitions are in many ways aspirational and incomplete. We present them to you as provocations, and we will demonstrate how they inform our work across several mediums and formats.
A city is where the density of interactions between people leads to new ideas, new art, new technology. The city is where we hash out our ideas, shape and develop concepts in a group setting, and find instant feedback. Citygroup has organized a debate series, Dialogue, Not Monologue, since 2018 to garner productive, impassioned discussions with anyone from the public, designer and non-designer. We debate how architecture operates as a discipline and a profession in the midst of larger social issues. Divergent ideas flourish in the city. The open call exhibitions we organize at our physical space in the Lower East Side allows many authors and their points of view to be exhibited together, simulating another form of discussion. The city is where spaces are shared. We also give our space over to artists and designers who want to make an independent statement about place. Intermittent shows allow the space to be a microphone for emerging voices. We welcome anyone from this audience to come participate in the making of the space and our content.
The city is where the shape of things is regulated by law. A city is a set of evolving rules that can be contested and rewritten. The city has agency to determine what can and cannot constitute a dwelling. In the open call exhibition, Compliant, participants surveyed how a dwelling is defined in various cities around the world. This collective research project created an index of how the building codes of different locations define the dimensional, light, ventilation, and egress requirements of a bedroom, and allowed us to interrogate the value of these rules. The city can change the city's rules. So the question is the city an administrative apparatus, or is the city its mobilized residents? In an attempt to discourage speculative luxury development in Flushing, Queens, Citygroup is helping local organizations in developing a rezoning plan, relying on contextual zoning to allow growth, increase affordable housing, heat manufacturing, and maintain the diversity of the neighborhood.
A city is where people draw close together for mutual defense and mutual aid. This sentiment underlies the Citygroup tradition of Chircolo, a standing weekly meetup that takes place in our space or online during the pandemic. Open to anyone, Chircolos are an evening to gather informally, eat dumplings from neighborhood establishments, and relax together, building up a network of conviviality and solidarity. And in the spirit of solidarity, we organized a zoning teach-in as part of our advocacy for a community-led rezoning plan in Chinatown, where activists, residents, and politicians gather to discuss the alternative zoning proposal for a site where a luxury residential tower is currently under construction. An alternative sign was posted to the ubiquitous green fence to demonstrate the type of development that the community wants.
A city is a place for trading information quickly. Our bulletin extends the collective space beyond its interior and onto the street to engage with the public. Artists reflect on the Citygroup Manifesto and respond to the themes of the exhibition's inside by designing a piece to fit in the poster frame outside. Manifesting Manifesto was an exhibition that asked participants to interrogate and edit the Citygroup Manifesto. Marked up, reformulated, and annotated, many iterations of the text were pinned to the wall, revealing the manifestation of a manifesto in a constant state of flux.
A city is a collective experience where life is affected by others. The city is a space of negotiation. This is something we considered when creating a board game we exhibited at the Oslo Architectural Triennial in 2019, where two players negotiate a shared living arrangement. Considering its advantages and drawbacks, they work out the calculus to create a place for each to call home. This collective negotiation also undergirds how we work together. Even making this lecture was a group discussion, an opportunity for us to collaborate on fonts and colors, but also the weightier questions we're posing to you all today.
The ground of the city is accessible to all. It is public. Public space creates places for people to meet and to assemble. This bench, based on the tete-a-tete or conversation chair, allows adjacent sitters to face opposite directions and converse. The form of this amenity aims to amplify discourse between city dwellers and to fortify the publicness of public space.
Difference thrives in the city. Protecting economic and cultural differences in communities that are threatened by the monoculture of luxury development is why we are active members of the Chinatown Working Group, a coalition of organizations advocating for a community-led rezoning plan for Chinatown and the Lower East Side. As part of the Chinatown Working Group, we created a series of analytic drawings and maps to identify sites that are vulnerable to overdevelopment and visualize the impact that both the current and community proposed zoning regulations would have on them. For the exhibition Plan Unplanned, Ideas for an Affordable Chinatown, we invited architects and artists to make design proposals for a number of these sites to further explore the positive impact passing the community-led zoning would have on the neighborhood. This material was then used by the Chinatown Working Group and City Councilman Christopher Marte in their advocacy for zoning reform.
The city is where housing is secure and affordable for all. For the exhibition Form and Rem, we asked the exhibition participants to claim a floor plate of 1 Manhattan Square, a relatively typical luxury tower, and to redraw its plan in a manner that challenges individual ownership, augments affordability, asserts use over exchange value, and serves constituents beyond the single family. Site 5 of the World Trade Center is the one parcel of the master plan left undeveloped, 20 years after 9/11, and it is the only site that will contain any residential units. In strong opposition to the creation of taxpayer-financed luxury housing, and in support of the Coalition for a 100% affordable 5 World Trade Center, we worked with the New York Review of Architecture to invite designers to imagine an alternative, fully affordable vision for 5 World Trade Center. Given that this is publicly owned land and that we are experiencing the severe lack of affordable housing in downtown Manhattan, we view this effort as a crucial political and symbolic gesture.
And now we would like to conclude with our most recent project called Off the Fence. This is the project that we created for the Architectural League Prize 2022 exhibition. And you can view this project and installation on the League website. And we've also recreated a fragment of this project behind us, as you can see in the space. We feel that the two definitions of the city, the CITY and the CITI, come into close contact in this project.
Upon hearing about the construction of another luxury super tall tower on the Lower East Side's waterfront, neighborhood organizations held a walking tour to call attention to the imminent threat to the community. During this tour, we collected quotes from the attendees and from various media sources reporting on the issue. We then created multicolored posters with a selection of the quotes we had collected. The posters were then installed on the green construction fence that surrounds the site of the future tower. The posters manifest a discourse across their expanse and offer an opportunity to discuss what is possible for the future of the neighborhood. A bench was an integral part of this installation, providing a vantage point from which to take in this text-based discussion. Also offering the opportunity to strike up a conversation about it with a fellow onlooker.
But the posters were soon painted over by the developers who control the site. However, the posters and the quotes could not be fully erased. The CITY can never be fully suppressed by the CITI. Ultimately, we see our work as a group, as architects and artists, as nourishing and fortifying the pockets of dissidence where the city with a Y pushes back against the city with an I. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. All right, thanks, Citygroup. Okay, hi, everyone. We are Departamento del Distrito here in Mexico City. First and foremost, just a really huge thank you to the Architectural League of New York for organizing this event, for all of their support, and really for all of the work that you do in promoting, supporting all of these young practices across North America. We feel very privileged and lucky to be part of this year's cohort of League Prize winners. And it's just a special opportunity for us to share our work, to be part of this larger, part of a larger group, and also to expand our practice through the lens of the prize and the installation. So tonight we'll present 3 recent projects that span a variety of topics and forms. I think Gabrielle also alluded to in this introduction, including our installation for the 2022 League Prize, a research and exhibition project that was part of the last Chicago Biennial, and finally, a cultural master plan that's currently under construction here in Mexico. But we've titled our lecture tonight, As Above, So Below, in relation to this year's theme, grounding. So we view design and research really as an opportunity to expand upon those local sites and projects of interest, linking them to geographies, time periods, and subjects that reach beyond their immediate bounds. Or like perhaps another way to put it is that we really do see the power and potential in everyday actions and elements, however small. Hi, I'm Francisco. Nathan and I co-founded Departamento del Distrito in 2017. We are based in Mexico City. The red arrow in the image is pointing to our office location where we are now speaking to you. And much of the work we do is highly site-specific. It's also a binational practice by the nature of its composition. I was born and raised in Mexico, while Nathan was born and raised in the US. In that regard, we are constantly engaging with acts of translation. This, of course, includes the translation of language. And we have made a conscious effort to produce all written material in both Spanish and English, but also the translation of culture, history, and symbolism. We have positioned ourselves in conversation with the lineage of critical practices that have sought to expand the arena of architecture to one that is not always about the construction of artifacts, but also one that provides a way of thinking about, observing, and analyzing contemporary society.
Our installation for the League Prize is titled When Models Are Systems. It is an adapted communication tower that produces its own energy and atmosphere. And here you can see an image from the opening, which was held 2 weeks ago on the roof of Laguna, which is a converted lace factory in Mexico City, which today houses a mix of cultural programs. And for those of you that maybe are new to the League, historically, installations for the League Prize have taken place in a gallery in New York, but since the pandemic, there's been a shift to site-specific installations. So, of course, while we would absolutely love to be in New York right now presenting this, one ambition that we had for the project was to take this shift in location as an opportunity. And for us, this really meant working with an exterior condition that was in constant flux,
and allowing us, importantly, to engage with the politics of natural resource management and energy production in Mexico. The rooftop as site was also of interest to us, particularly in relationship to the theme of grounding. It's a place where anonymous city infrastructures are located in elevated, unobstructed positions that facilitate our daily routines and connect us on the ground. So we documented communication towers throughout the city, which are fitted with electronic devices, transmitters, receivers, and power sources, and worked to reformulate these components toward a different end. So our tower plays host to an assemblage of devices that collectively measure, channel, and ultimately generate an exterior environment. Attached to a 7-meter tall tubular steel structure at varying heights, these devices ground electrical currents, measure humidity, collect rainwater, monitor wind flows, reflect light, and produce solar energy. This energy, in turn, powers integrated spotlights that illuminate the surrounding roof deck, loudspeakers sync to a playlist that's also featured on our installation page, and misters that cool the air, a temporal space where gathering is produced. Here we have some pictures from the installation, from the opening event. So really what the installation is doing is plugging into existing social, environmental, and built systems on site. And so the installation is grounded to its context, both physically and operationally. The atmospheric products of the tower are active for a finite period of time each day, determined by the amount of energy that is produced and stored by a single 85-watt solar panel linked to a generator and battery. And we have a picture of that on the third image to the right. So taking advantage of the rainy season in Mexico City, which spans late May through November, the project is dependent on the periods of intense morning sunshine and afternoon thunderstorms that are typical during these months. And in that way, when models our systems, makes visible both the precarity and potential of Mexico's natural environment, which at the present moment is really being threatened by a renewed federal focus on hydrocarbon industries throughout the country. And for us, this interest in systems stems directly from an approach to design that's based in program, in operation, in the construction of relationships, and in the ability to literally provide an abstract model or machine for future practice.
We'll shift now to a research and exhibition project that we developed for the last Chicago Architecture Biennial, which looks at the current status of architectural and urban projects constructed during the so-called Milagro Mexicano, or Mexican Miracle in Mexico City. Today, many of these projects, and there are hundreds that we've cataloged, stand at a turning point. Architecture from the 20th century in Mexico is largely unprotected by federal preservation law, and many of them will either be demolished or renovated in the coming decade, based on the whims of private owners and developers. This project seeks to generate a public conversation around the future of these sites and asks, what value do they hold for our current society? Here we have our initial selection of at-risk sites, which includes some well-known projects, such as Felix Candela's Restaurante Los Manantiales and Mario Pani's Tlatelolco Social Housing Complex. Though, as we added to this list, we quickly realized that the format was insufficient to represent the sheer quantity of sites in question. So we shifted to this graphic timeline approach, where we cataloged over 500 buildings through the time period with at-risk sites represented in red. You'll see that some of those lines do not reach all the way to 2022 at the far right, which means they were previously demolished. At the heart of this project are questions surrounding narratives of national identity and progress. The mid-20th century, after the Second World War, was a period of sustained economic growth and development in Mexico, pushed forward by industrialization, increased foreign influence, particularly from the United States, and the emergence of a new capitalist class. Politicians and economists pushed to transform Mexico into a developed country and to assert a modern national identity. Modernism became the perfect vehicle. These aspirations were materialized at tremendous scale in the mid-20th century through public projects, some of which are pictured in this slide. The campus of UNAM, the public university, the Tlatelolco social housing complex, which was planned for a capacity of more than 100,000 inhabitants. It should also be noted that this project resulted from one of the largest slum clearance schemes ever executed in Mexico, displacing thousands of residents of northern Mexico City. And finally, the stadia and infrastructure built for the 1968 Olympic Games, the first to be held in Latin America. These images also speak to the city's urban and regional fabric, which was radically transformed through infrastructure projects, including freeways, expressways, overpasses, tunnels, and an underground metro system. The capital was literally built and marketed in the image of an independent, consolidated country for an international audience. And of course, we know from recent history in the United States, dominant national narratives that promote identity are often exclusionary, based in the politics of race, gender, and class. In Mexico City, a population that did not feel represented by these images of national progress, primarily students and working class citizens, staged a series of protests advocating for things like an end to police brutality, stronger rights for laborers and construction workers, and more open dialogue with government officials. On October 2, 1968, just 10 days before the Olympics were scheduled to open, the state violently suppressed a peaceful student demonstration, which you can see in this photo. It is estimated that 325 people were killed, thousands injured, and thousands arrested. This took place in the Mario Pani designed housing development of Tlatelolco in the Plaza of Three Cultures, a highly charged and symbolic site, a public square that incorporated contextual fragments from three periods in Mexican history: pre-Hispanic, colonial, and modern. It was a moment of reckoning for modernism that was deeply tied to a loss of legitimacy for the Mexican state. And it is something that is still very much part of the national consciousness.
So our project, titled Miracles Now, produced for the 2021 Chicago Architecture Biennial, picks up this history, especially in light of the hundreds of at-risk sites from this era, and asks, now what? When buildings fall, literally by planned demolition, structural failure, or ideologically through abandonment, neglect, social aspirations that go unfulfilled, what is at stake for our current society? What heritage is lost, and for whom? The installation is structured around 6 case studies, with material grouped and organized on a long podium that sits at the center of a gallery space at the Graham Foundation. We made a conscious decision to not include any archival content, and instead, it was important to show the current state of these projects through different media: photography, text, video, and found objects. And in that way, it became a project with quite blurry boundaries when it comes to authorship and also the traditional role of the architect. The exhibition included several data visualizations. We conceptualized this particular graphic as a zoom in of the larger timeline. And so to read this, a green to red gradient is used to represent the preservation status of a select number of projects, with green representing a stable, low-risk condition and red representing an unstable, high-risk condition. And what's interesting is that the life of many of these projects is volatile, falling into disrepair, changing ownership, and then being renovated several times throughout their histories. Natural disasters such as earthquakes also play a role, and these events are represented by the red dashed lines that cut vertically down the graphic. There was also an effort to situate each of these sites within a much larger discussion surrounding the contemporary growth and development of Mexico City. So on the left, we see a map that locates all catalog projects in relationship to environmental risk factors, including soil type and related impact zones from earthquakes in 1985 and 2017. And on the right, you see where current real estate speculation is most intense today, based on government geospatial data published in 2019, showing real estate transactions on the top in red and construction sites, active construction sites below in blue. We have an installation image where you can clearly see the mix of content. We commissioned photographer Adriana Hamoy for the photographs and artist Irina Shabanova for the illustrations, the broadsheet publications, one for each of the 6 case studies, which contains also an interview on the opposite side, and we're free for takeaway by exhibition visitors. The free publication has also been a concerted effort as a practice to engage with a much larger public and to reach outside of the insular world of art and architecture. So in tandem with the installation in Chicago, the publication was distributed for free in Mexico City by dropping them in the metro, hanging them at magazine stands, and pasting them to the sides of abandoned buildings or construction sites.
This leads us to the last project we will present tonight, which is the Cultural Master Plan for Tulane, a municipality just north of Mexico City that sits at the base of the Sierra de Guadalupe mountain range, which you can see on the lower part of the aerial image. The Mexican federal government, through the Secretary of Agrarian, Territorial, and Urban Development, SEDATU in Spanish, began an ambitious plan in 2019 called the Urban Improvement Program, or Programa de Mejoramiento Urbano, with the aim of developing public works in underserved communities throughout the country. This government program has initiated approximately 800 projects in 24 states in just over 3 years. Popularly referred to under the rubric of President Andrés Manuel López Obrador's fourth transformation, or 4T, this quantity of public architecture and infrastructure work has not been seen in Mexico since the mid-20th century, basically the Milagro Mexicano period that we just introduced. So there is something unfolding right now in Mexico, in which there is an extreme investment in architecture and design that is comparable in scope and ambition to the previous era. As part of this federal government program, our office has been involved in the development of 5 public projects, working in collaboration with ORU, an urbanism and landscape office in Mexico City, Ricardo Garcia Santander, and Taller Architects, who are based in Colombia. When we started working on the master plan, we felt the need to find, through research, a series of references that would allow us to develop these 5 projects in record time, since, as you can imagine, the calendar was limited. Tulane is part of an industrial corridor of great regional importance that is already accompanied by a clear typology. You can see from the image on the right the massive scale that many of these warehouses and industrial facilities have, especially when compared to the small residential neighborhoods that surround them. From these contemporary industrial references found directly in the area, encompassing local materials, building practices, and forms, we generated a basic system that could be replicated across the 5 projects, making them part of a family, but with a flexibility to allow each one to respond appropriately to its unique site and program. These are recent images taken last week of the projects under construction. The programs include a municipal market, a house of culture, a park and sports center, a fire station, and an agora that contains an auditorium and library. For its size and complexity, the agora and library, Elena Poniatowska, was literally the biggest challenge out of the 5 projects. Sitting within a mega block in a residential area, it holds a number of public programs such as public middle school, National Guard headquarters, daycare, and women's center. The block was a barrier between the residential neighborhoods on the south and a commercial strip on the north. Addressing this issue, we opened up the site for pedestrian use, creating a linear public space that would serve as the access point for all 3 buildings, while also achieving better circulation for the adjacent programs. The project is composed of 3 main buildings placed along the east and west borders of the site: a cultural center and music school that contains a cafeteria and gallery, a library that contains an auditorium and children's daycare center, and finally, a medical center that contains administrative offices. We embraced a matte building typology where a series of large courtyards break up otherwise simple rectilinear volumes, and connections are facilitated by pergolas that provide cover from intense sun.
The construction method is extremely simple and again, something that you find all over Tulane, which is a steel frame structure infilled with concrete block. And in our specific case, a steel cladding or a steel corrugated sheeting was added as cladding. Color was also integrated as a wayfinding device for such a massive project and scale. So it was important to facilitate the navigation of this project in some way. And so the structure of each of the three main buildings is painted differently. Here we have the Music and School and Cultural Center, which the structure painted a pale pink. And we integrated two different courtyard typologies. Larger voids serve as main building entrances at the central spine, such as the image on the left, which is taken inside the gallery space, looking through the entrance courtyard and into the cafeteria. And then smaller voids situated within the building interior that bring in natural light and provide protected exterior spaces, such as the image on the right, which is part of the library. Community engagement was and continues to be an important part of the design process throughout the development of the master plan. And we pushed for some quite unconventional pairings, such as in this particular project, which combines a fire station and small medical center with a public plaza. And the argument here is that the activities and personnel of the fire station that are there 24/7 anchor the public plaza and provide a clearly defined public space within a neighborhood where security and safety are serious concerns.
We also pushed for the inclusion of an elevated outdoor basketball court, which satisfies part of the program brief that asks for a contained exterior space for exercise. So instead of having that on the ground floor and surrounded by a fence, it's elevated, leaving most of the ground floor publicly accessible. There's also the idea that this elevated court may be utilized by the surrounding neighborhood at special moments during the year and accessed through the central tower. These images are very recent, and you can see that the project is nearing completion. On the lower left is an image from the common room for the firefighters that contains a kitchen which looks out onto the public plaza below. Once they take down the construction fencing, which is lining the perimeter, the entire front corner of the site will be open to the public and function as a shared community space. In this section of Tulane, there are no shaded public parks, so our ambition was to create a space that would eventually be adopted and activated by the neighborhood.
So in closing, we'd like to reiterate two driving motivations for our work and also close with an image from our League Prize installation. And the first is really the belief that design has the ability to embed everyday actions and elements, however small, with power and potential. And the second is really an approach to architecture based in program, systems, operation, and in the construction of new relationships that may provide a model for how we inhabit the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was fantastic. Really, really wonderful presentations. Thank you both and congratulations again. It was great for you to share your work with us. I'm really excited about this chance to discuss your work with you. Would like to also mention for everyone in the audience, we invite you to please submit your questions using the Q&A feature. And we'll pose them to Citygroup and Francisco and Nathan in a few moments. So you'll find that in your Zoom window, you can just click Q&A and add a question, and we'll be able to bring it to the practices tonight. I have a few questions, so we'll start with that. And I think that they're pertinent to both of your practices, and having questions like this, I hope that there's also some dialogue between each other, between the both of you as you hear each other's responses. So starting with the first inquiry, both of your practices engage with preservation, albeit in different ways. Citygroup, your work in Chinatown and in Flushing strives in part for housing preservation, taking on the dimensions of its legal, economic, social, and spatial dimensions. Departamento del Distrito, you have worked with a range of existing and historic structures, ruins, modernist developments at risk of demolition, and others. What do, and this is in many ways connecting to the theme, what do these existing social and physical fabrics mean to your practices? How do you determine how to engage with them?
Sure, we can start. I mean, I think maybe for us, the clearest example is looking at the project on modernist preservation, in which a lot of the sites, Tlatelolco, for example, resulted from massive slum clearance schemes, right, in which there was a sort of imaginary tabula rasa condition that was imposed on a site. And I think for us, it's quite obvious, and to many contemporary practitioners, that right, that this tabula rasa condition doesn't exist, and that there's also these existing systems, these existing social fabrics on site, no matter the place. And as designers, it's really our responsibilities to incorporate them and to take them seriously and respect them. So it gets a little noisy here, as a basic approach to design. And so I think always for us, we're not anti-form, but we never lead with form. It's always coming out of a sort of systems approach, a diagram, a series of relationships that we want to create or foster or kind of situate ourselves within. And then I think the form is a result of all of those things coming together. But it's never a sort of formal logic that is imposed in comparison to that mid-20th century work.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, responding to your the second part of your question, Gabriel, I would say we get to that through research, which I'm sure is the way Citygroup gets to their projects and to the way they work with an existing condition. We try consciously to both, yes, do archival research, more academic research on the sites, but also engage with the community and really try to understand what they want from these projects. So it's a multi-level research, I would say.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in from our perspective, but I think a couple of people might want to say something. But I would say our understanding of preservation has actually been really transformed through working with these neighborhoods and communities, both in Chinatown and Flushing. I think so often activists or neighborhood community organizations get accused of wanting to preserve a neighborhood or community and not let anything change. But what we've really found, and this is a lot of the reason why we feel like we can plug in as architects, is that the coalitions and activist organizations that we work with, they do want to preserve their neighborhood, but they also understand that neighborhoods have to change, that we need more affordable housing across the entire city. So they understand that preservation isn't just about freezing a place, about not changing anything. And so I think that has expanded what we understand preservation as. It doesn't necessarily mean just relating to the built environment. It means maintaining the class difference of a neighborhood, the cultural difference. It's much more, it's many different things. And I think that's been kind of inspiring and exciting to engage with.
Yeah, and I would add just that, we realize that in every neighborhood, likely around the world, there are already always groups who are having these conversations, who are organizing, who are interested in what happens to their neighborhood. And so I think as a group, our approach is more to come and say, like, we have these sort of this spatial training. What do you need that is in the spatial realm and how can we help? So it's always about seeing what organization is already, having these conversations.
I'll quickly add that I think it's interesting that the kind of preservation that both Michael and AJ just mentioned is sort of at odds with the typical characterization of preservation, where you sort of have an 18th or 19th century home or building that is impressive and you want to maintain its outward appearance, and a lot of preservation entities function to preserve the facade of a building. And in the work we've done, it's about preserving an ecosystem or preserving the culture, the
Deeper structures.
yeah, it might not have to do with the outward appearance of the building at all.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it sounds like both practices have a similar approach, where maybe the traditional understanding of preservation is not so relevant and has to do more with kind of cultural fabric and the sociability that you're tapping into in that particular situation, spatial situation. Another question that I'm curious about for both of you is how in your practices the status of the client or the status of the commissioner is often different from what we're used to seeing in conventional practice. In the case of Citygroup, given the wide pool of participants that you have in your projects, how do you characterize and calibrate this relationship with those that you advocate for? Do you see that there are clients in your practice, or is it another type of construct? And Francisco and Nathan, you oftentimes prompt conversations about architecture, kind of posing certain inquiries to the public at large. How have you found that the public responds, different publics respond to it? And I guess more broadly, for both of you, if the nature of the designer is changing, do you feel that the nature of the client also shifts in the process?
Well, I'll jump in because it's also directly related to the question about preservation. And for us, it also gets to a very basic question of how do you assign value in the built environment in the city? And particularly in Mexico City, one issue that is at play is basic legislation around preservation, the laws, rules, regulations that actually preference the preservation of Spanish colonial era and pre-Hispanic architecture over 20th century architecture. And it's interesting for us because specifically this moment during the Milagro Mexicano was a moment in which there was a sort of national voice tied to architecture and design. And so a lot of that content, a lot of that city fabric is now at risk. And we realized that for us, we can't just keep, celebrating or speaking about these particular projects within closed insular academic circles, because obviously we are not the ones with the power in this game. And that if we actually want to enact change, it needs to be a much broader conversation. And we also need to approach these topics and these structures with a pretty open mind. I think we've never been from the standpoint of like, oh, these master projects need to be preserved. It's more, how do we assess their value for contemporary society today? Should they be preserved? If so, how and for whom, and who benefits from that? And so in order to really get into that, it needs to be a broader conversation. And so through the publication, we've had that through lectures, through discussion groups. You never really know how things are being disseminated or discussed. And I think one question that has come up a few different times, like, okay, you've done this research and this project, now what? Like, how do you really get into and enact change or make a difference? And I think that it's still a project that's ongoing for us in terms of how to really intervene in a meaningful way.
Yes, and adding to that, I think it's a really fascinating question. I hadn't thought about it. Obviously, the role of the architect and the designer is changing. I think we agree, and I'm sure Citygroup would agree, because that's what we're doing. It's the nature of the way we operate. I'm not sure if the nature of the client is changing. I think through projects like the publication, we, yes, are trying to communicate ideas in a different way into different audiences. So we're hoping that that could also happen. And we've had interesting, not to make this too long, but we've had interesting interactions, for example, with our client from the house that we talk about in the interview for the Architectural League, and which was focused on, featured, sorry, on the portfolio. I remember actually that the publication project was actually coming out at the same time that the house was being built. And I remember talking to the client, like giving her some of the publications because she was interested when I told her about it. And I think it really made her, if not change the way she approached the project, I think it made her understand our approach better, like the way we designed the project. So in a way, it kind of, I think, diagonally changed the dynamic.
I think we can relate to this perspective so eloquently put by Departamento, that sometimes it feels that the client is not really changing. And I think a lot of us feel that typically in the architect's profession, you very rarely get to choose your clients, and your clients are not always asking for you to work for social justice or for you to work for the community. And so I think one of the things that Citygroup has allowed us to do is to find some of the civic problems as our clients. And one of the things that some of the exhibitions allow us to do is sort of call multiple solutions, because it's not always clear, what will best address the community's needs.
I don't know that we've ever discussed who our client is, which is, it's nice. Your group has always asked us great questions. I wonder, I think our lecture also just shows that maybe the city is our client, and we're taking that on. And I think also maybe the discipline is our client. And we're really wondering or asking it what it wants to be and what it needs. And I think we're sort of dissecting that and not really knowing where we're heading, but we're just trying to understand what the discipline is too. So
yeah, I would add that to a certain degree, I think Citygroup works for an audience before it works for a client. That's been supported by the fact that we don't work for profit. So in a way, we don't have a typical client structure. But I completely support everything that David and Marika have just said, and that frustration that the Departamento outlined, that the clients don't change, is sort of something we are trying to sidestep until we know what client we can work for.
Yeah.
But if Chinatown is the client working group, I think we are listening to them, and they are. Yeah, I think it's a different relationship.
In some ways, it's not like for the work in Chinatown, it's not like we're the architects.
Yeah.
They're our client that we're responding to in a lot of ways. I think a lot of our projects don't come from someone coming to us and asking us to solve something or to address something or create something. The projects emerge through listening to our neighbors and our community members and the activists in our community and gaining trust with those people. And then we are really part of those activist efforts and initiatives. And by becoming part of these initiatives, then projects emerge. So in some ways in those projects, it's like, so I don't know if there's a client that we're responding to, because it's kind of emerging out of these collective discussions and efforts.
Yeah, it's more collaborative. I feel like a client architect relationship is somebody has a skill that they're getting paid for. We have more than just architects in the group. We have a lot of different voices. We have a very open door, and so it's more of a collaboration. A lot of us live in the communities where we engage. I wouldn't even really say work, because again, that gets into labor and transaction. It's more like we're communicating and listening and hearing and responding collectively to the context in which we exist. And yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, it really comes across that in both of your practices, there's an urge to create new kinds of relationships between architects and all the other entities that somehow have a stake in the environment. And yeah, it seems like there's a spectrum of different engagements that you're all working with. Super inspiring. Another question that I was curious about, and I hope this applies to most of you, I think that it does, has to do with your substantial involvement in teaching. Teaching both formally in the sense of being an instructor in the university, but also informally, public pedagogy in the streets, teach-ins, and so on. Can you talk about your interest in this? What are the roles of architects in teaching or in kind of larger pedagogical ambitions? And maybe slightly more specifically, for those of you who can reply to this, given the practices that you are guiding, what ambitions do you have for architecture education today?
Yeah, well, I think it is a sort of relationship and a dynamic that we're constantly mediating. And, Francisco and I gain a lot from teaching. Quite frankly, I think it's something that keeps us current, obviously encourages research. And if you're involved also with an institution that supports your own research, right, it tends to reflect back into the practice. And I think that for both of us, it's just essential to really be listening to students, to this younger generation, to their concerns, and addressing them through design in some way, shape, or form. Because I think that, they see the wide range that is architecture, that is the discipline of architecture. And I think they're kind of hungry for that. So to be able to address it in a substantial way through architectural education, which for us, I think means a shift away from the artifact, away from the object, and this constant need for growth and development, to more point-specific approaches, lighter touches. I think all of those things that maybe they don't result in perhaps projects that are as clearly legible as a previous generation might be used to, but that for us are far more impactful in terms of the change and what we see as urgent today, in terms of the discipline, in terms of our world, in terms of our cities. So I think for us, it's a kind of, it can be a dynamic that's difficult to juggle sometimes, but that is extremely rewarding. And I think, especially if you're interested in an academic practice and a critical practice, having also that academic community, both of other faculty members, administrators, and students, to act as a sounding board is really essential.
Yeah, and I would add that what we think, and obviously you would agree, what we think is necessary like what are the needs, urgent needs of today's world, but also what they as students see as urgent needs, because sometimes those don't align. They're not the same. Sometimes you think that you're a young practitioner, you're cutting edge and progressive, and I like to think we are, but you talk to your students and you realize that you're clearly from a different generation. They have other concerns. So I just reiterating what Nate was saying, for us, I think the ambition, even though the formats of academia sometimes don't allow it for that, is to try to do or have education be as specific as possible to the individual. Also, of course, considering the larger needs of communities, and to really be able to kind of like end this hierarchical relationship. Of course, we are there because we have more knowledge in certain areas than they do, but that doesn't mean that we have to impose all these ideas. Like for us, teaching design is more of a conversation, and as he was saying, like we gain a lot from having conversations in the studio with our students, and yeah, we're extremely excited when the outcomes of the studios in both schools where we teach are varied. I think for us, it's extremely suspicious when the outcome of studios looks all the same, because then it's really the work of the teacher. It's not really the voices of the students being put on a platform. So for us, the more varied, the better.
I think for us, with some of the activities of sort of public advocacy and some of the projects, like, for example, in support of the Chinatown Working Group rezoning plan, our efforts at engagement are really centered around the need to build alliances and to sort of drive certain outcomes. So, for example, with the Chinatown Working Group plan, there's zoning code, there's the city's code, there's the proposed community code, and then you have the renderings of buildings that are put on construction fences that tell everyone what's coming, and being able to translate what the community proposed as a visual alternative to that and sort of tell everyone about it is a way to build support for the community rezoning effort and to sort of, actually build up some, political will among many people behind it.
And I think just building on that, AJ, we've done a couple of zoning teach-ins, and that's what AJ was describing, where we'll meet up at an intersection, at a site in the city, on the ground of the city, and we'll meet up as our group, but also with our community partners and political partners. And a teach-in suggests the idea that we're there teaching, potentially it could suggest that we're there teaching people about zoning law and architectural characteristics or architectural specifics or details. But I think what really is exciting about those teach-ins is, yes, we use architectural tools to help explain zoning and explain how the city might develop if a different zoning code was passed, but they really turn into these discussions where we learn from the people who show up, and they're a conversation among all of us. And I think that among all of us, and then we're learning from the residents and from our partners. And in some ways I think that can be a model potentially for academia, possibly like a more discursive approach to teaching possibly, and then also like not highlighting individual mentors or individual teachers, not valuing that so much, but kind of valuing the collective energy of both the students, the instructors, of everybody. So I don't know, I think perhaps taking some of the lessons that we've learned through our activities in the city, in the streets, on the ground, back into the classroom would be exciting, and then potentially also dragging maybe students out into these neighborhoods.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are here because of the shortcomings of academia and its complete disconnect, not complete, but fairly complete disconnect from the reality on the ground. And so
Yeah, I think the one thing, I mean, it's already been stated, but for me, teaching more in an academic setting is a very pure way of communicating. So if you're communicating with a client, you usually have some agenda for a project or something that you're trying to achieve. But when you're discussing something with someone else and you're trying to depart knowledge to them, and you try on like an opinion even for your own, it's a great opportunity to even see if what you're saying is what you believe. And it's really hard to try that out in other settings. And I think it's such a rewarding experience to get feedback on discussions and ideas. And it's such a great way to really dial in what you care about and hear what other people care about. So
Yeah, I think there's a parallel between the work we've done with activist organizations like the zoning teach-in that's been mentioned a couple of times, and the face of a changing academia, which I really think is underway. And in both of those contexts, I see it more as a feedback loop. So there's one speaker and a responder, and that responder might inform the speaker of something they're unaware of. And then the conversation is propelled forward that way. And it's not so much a hierarchical configuration that maybe all of us were more conditioned by, where there was an authority and we were the pupils.
I mean, we always say dialogue, not monologue. It's one of the things we always repeats. I think, yeah, that seems to be underlying all the answers.
It's brilliant. It's really fascinating how you both approach that. And it seems like these sort of educational conversations really enrich what you do and shape your practices. I think this would be a good time to also take the questions from the audience, as there's already a number of them that have been brought to the table. We can start with this one, which is from an anonymous attendee who says, I found it very interesting how both your lectures are focused on specific places and sites, and yet there were aspects of your work, i.e. the building code study of international cities by Citygroup and the buildings at risk by Departamento, that extended far beyond a specific place. How important do you find this kind of work to your practices? And how has the larger scope of study informed the way you work for a specific place, if at all?
I'll jump in. I appreciate the question a great deal, because I think maybe one point we've made over and over is how embedded we find ourselves in the neighborhood that we practice out of. That being said, the rules of zoning, the rules of codes are interesting because of how many times they've been iterated through and exercised in different places. And it's so helpful to catalog these situations as they're exemplified across the world, and select, evaluate, retain what we think is successful, and hopefully could be a model for the work we want to do here.
Mm-hmm. And I think we found the theme of grounding, the way in which it was put forth in terms of this year's LEAD Prize submission, was really exciting, because at first I think it suggests this idea of being grounded in one place, but like the way in which the prompt was put forth was it forced us to think about the way in which the ground or grounding mediates all these more abstract forces. And I think that really helped us reframe our own work in terms of like the way in which zoning is about one specific site, but it's also about a series of rules and a series of policies. And so it does allow us to kind of like jump back and forth between those different scales and mediums in exciting ways.
Yeah, I think with us, I mean, it's almost we can't avoid it to be working sure, like be grounded in Mexico City, in Mexico, but at the same time we have to have this connection, this larger connection, also because Nathan is not from here, and also because our education, at least partially mine, happened elsewhere. So for me, there's no other way to kind of like approach design, at least contemporarily, if it's not by, yes, understanding the site, knowing what the issues are, but also understanding that those issues and those complexities of the site are not disconnected from the world and from other sites that have the same set of conditions. So yeah, for me, again, like I think if we worked separately, we would still work this way, but because we work together and we're this binational basically practice, I think it's just a natural approach.
Right, I think it's really an ambition of any project that we have is that it can operate at multiple scales, and that there are very relevant and specific stakes for this particular city that we're housed in, but that conversation can actually take place in many different areas. If you take, again, sort of issue of modernist preservation, that of course is not unique only to Mexico City, but it's kind of unfolding differently in many different places and cities. So I think, you know, for any sort of punctual research that you can really sink your teeth into, that specificity is required, but the stakes in order to kind of translate to a larger audience, they need to be broad.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. There is another question that we could look at. This is a question from Jeremy Foster, who says the following: thank you for the fascinating presentations. I see both practices as engaged in teasing out and elaborating a far finer grained sense of how the built environment works, practically, socially, imaginatively, than is usually recognized by the usual capitalist developmental forces driving city making today. Have there been any situations where you've seen your work being recognized and used by that audience? I presume that when Jeremy says that audience, they're referring to the capitalist developmental audience. And if you've had any interaction with that side of the city making.
Well, our presentation or our show that we made for this award behind us got painted over shortly after it was put up, and a pretty obvious silencing of voices that are contrary to the CITI. So.
And maybe we'll get some legal repercussions for the logo, but hopefully not.
For that. Not yet. Not yet.
In our case, I was also tempted to say not yet. But I was thinking about, I mean, not yet, sure, because it didn't crystallize, but it's an interesting question, because we have been, and this is also to talk about a larger, well, something else that's happening in Mexico City. We have been contacted by a real estate developer who was interested in our work and basically recognized, yes, whatever qualities our work has, and was interested in giving us a project. And we actually, we had several meetings, we talked about it. At the end, it didn't happen, but I think, I mean, I'm not sure if this is something that happens. I'm sure it's happening elsewhere. I'm not sure if it's happening in New York or elsewhere in the US, but there is actually a group of young real estate developers in the city. I can probably name a few, there's like 3 or 4, who are actually looking for young designers with fresh ideas and with, new approaches to design. And yes, working with them and giving them projects. They're mainly housing projects, I would think. So, and they have a different approach. Like, of course, at the end of the day, the idea for them is to make money, but they are looking for other voices because they know it's there's an audience for that already. And at least in Mexico City, it's true. There is, like, there are people who are interested in, I don't know, fresher ideas of how to approach design.
I think this relates to the former question also. Hi, Jeremy.
Hi, Dora.
About the clients, the traditional role of the client, how we position ourselves. You know, for our practice, profit and how we sustain the practice is a definite concern. It's something that we grapple with every day. So I think that research and sometimes these more academic projects, for us, there's a sort of hypothesis that has not yet been proved, embedded in them, that because we are interested in these themes surrounding preservation and value in the city, that we're kind of inserting ourselves into a larger discussion, right? Through the publication project, which is funded by the Ministry of Culture here, through getting grants or being involved in biennials. And then perhaps at some later date, we may be asked to actually be involved in the design capacity and involved in one of those projects that actually deal with an existing structure. Like, obviously, no one yet is coming to us asking us to do that. But I think it's important in order to, I don't know, maintain some sort of control or autonomy, or even maintain the fantasy of control in this whole game, that we can somehow drive the way our practice develops in the future and what kind of projects we're involved in.
Fantastic. That's really, really fascinating. Thank you both for sharing. There is another question in many ways related to an aspect we were discussing before, but maybe there are further thoughts about it. A question from Gabriel Villalobos, who asks, in this context, I guess the context of the practices that you are guiding, to what extent can architectural education incorporate, or maybe education in general, incorporate the social and systemic perspectives that both practices work from? Do you think that architecture schools should reinforce these perspectives and sensibilities, or are they better learned in practice?
I think in many ways, some architectural educations do incorporate a healthy amount of, let's say, institutional critique. A lot of student assignments are meant to challenge the student to analyze a context from multiple vectors and let their project respond to that. I think something, I don't know if this is exactly an answer to the question, but something that we found upon working in the profession is that you actually, it's not that the pedagogy of education is lacking, it's that the profession is not allowing for that full spectrum of architectural thought. So I think a lot of our work is trying to make that relevant or demonstrate that that's relevant for young designers to pursue after graduation.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we would say, Gabriel, that absolutely. We think it's a sort of essential to integrate these concerns about really what it means to build today, and to integrate a certain political, social, historical consciousness into the students. And I think, yeah, again, as mentioned, this is happening to some degree, and I think it's also, a really tricky game in some sense, in terms of exactly what is included in the traditional circuit of architectural education, so that students, yes, do graduate with some degree of proficiency in terms of building Which I think, yeah, it's always this balance of tipping the scale one direction or another. And I don't think any school has really figured it out, right? Like it's always being kind of reevaluated and reorganized. And there's something I think kind of refreshing about that like we're kind of unstable as a discipline, and there's a sort of reflexive property involved in these schools where there is critique internal to the curriculum and the pedagogy, and it's kind of constantly being evaluated. So for us, that's definitely an essential part of teaching, but I think, yes, it is a balance to be struck. And so where that comes in terms of if it's a 5-year pre-arch education, when that comes into the picture, I think it's something to really be discussed and debated.
Yeah, and did you want to?
No, go ahead.
No, I would just to, I don't know, have a conversation about this. I would say it's also important though to be careful about the way in which social and political issues are brought into academic environments. And I think in our own work, we've really taken a lot of time to be patient and listen and form connections with communities. And we understand that the issues that Chinatown or Flushing are the issues they're facing are really serious and they're real, and they have to be taken seriously. And like the work we're doing, I mean, the work we're doing is trying to really be like part of these efforts and bring, I don't know if I'd say bring change, but to like, I don't know, embed ourselves in these efforts. And I don't know if just doing like an academic studio on, say like the Chinatown Working Group plan or something that we're doing in the neighborhood would really, I think it has to like serve these communities, and like they can't just be laboratories to be studied within an academic environment, because that, it reiterates some of the problematic approaches of academia, and also just of like participatory design or participation. I think that's something we're trying to elaborate and change. And instead of asking communities to participate in design projects, and we're trying to participate in communities and be designers.
I do think it's a new language, like an ethics language that we are not very good at. And I think in teaching, like I know that institutions are definitely making changes, but I don't know if the curriculum has a clarity. I think there's always this pocket of either it's climate or it's social or it's these other things, but I think broadly it's ethics. And I think if we can look at that at every step of the way, just like you look at form or you look at some other way of approaching a spatial problem, if it's just one of the elements, it'd be really great to incorporate in education.
Yeah, I don't know how you teach these things as not being just topics, and teach them as being real things that affect real people and affect you, the student. So figuring out how to teach the reality is probably the key.
Yeah, I was going to just add that I totally agree. I honestly don't think there needs to be, like, the sooner the better. Like I don't think that there should be compartmentalization, or like this is the moment when you start talking about reality and this is the moment where you don't talk about reality. I think because reality is there, the students are living in reality, and I think they already have these concerns. So I think the sooner the better you talk about them. Like I don't think there is an issue about learning how to draw a wall and at the same time talking about what's going on in the world, because clearly there's a lot going on in the world. So I believe that it's the teachers and also the school's responsibility to bring these questions to the table and have an agency, have a direction.
Thank you so much. It's been fascinating to hear how your practices, which have such a fundamental interest in ethical dilemmas or ethical limits and possibilities of architecture, also finds its way always into questions of design. And that has been really, really inspiring. It's been fascinating and really a pleasure to speak with you about your work, and congratulations again on behalf of the committee. And we're just really excited to see what your future endeavors will bring next. So thank you. And I'll pass it back to Anne now to conclude the event.
Thank
And-
you.
Oh, sorry, go ahead first.
Just thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank everyone for joining us. I mean, I guess the subtitle for tonight could have been engagement. Please come back next week, same time, same place, for the principals Isaac Stein and Maggie Sang of DBT in Houston, and Jose Amazurritia and Carlos Faccio back in Mexico City again. And this will be moderated by Luis Beltran del Rio Garcia. We appreciate the incredible work that these presentations and practices represent. If you haven't had a chance yet to visit the installations on the website, please do. And if you want to listen to these again or let other people know about them, the recordings will be up within the next few weeks, along with some interviews with different firm members. One already is up with the Citygroup, extended Citygroup gang, and you'll see the other ones coming up soon too. So thank you very much for joining us this evening.